That's, again, what frustrates me a little bit, because we have to sort of explain to companies to a certain extent of the need for that research to come before the design process, so that it then pushes the design process and informs it, so that designers are not making decisions in a vacuum.
Hi, this is the UX Usability Podcast, and I'm Dr. Chris Parker. You know, it doesn't matter if you are a massive multinational company like Amazon or Facebook, or if you're just starting out doing a small student business trying to make some money on the side and maybe it'll turn into a dream later on. You always need to design, websites, products that meet people's needs, not just the basic needs of finding a way through a website, getting to a task, but actually giving people something that they can't describe easily in words. They can't just tell you what they want because they just don't know it. Maybe what they need, maybe the solution is something which is so far outside their experience, they can't begin to tell you. And to do this, you need amazing design research. The ways that you can talk to people about what it feels like when they go through something which is just annoying. It's more than just something which you have to accept. It's something which causes an emotional change in them. And this is the kind of opportunity that can lead to a great UX insight and a great UX product. Tonight, my guest, Francess Brown, is a design consultant, a design research consultant, and we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about what it's like to work as a design researcher, what are the key skills, what's the key mindset, and what you need to know to be successful as a design researcher. It's been an absolute pleasure to have Francess on the podcast, and I know you're going to have a great and informative time listening. So sit back with whatever you're doing, grab a cup of coffee, and listen to our conversation.
As part of my degree, which I did back in UCC in University College Cork, where I'm from, we had a course in human-computer interaction, which at that time was rather new and different because, I'm old. And it was, the concept of user experience was relatively new, I suppose. It existed. In academia, it was quite niche, especially in the world of psychology. We had a really good but very small HCI department with a few researchers in there who were sort of cutting edge, I suppose, as much as it went at that time, looking at technology and the interaction of humans with technology. So actually myself and my husband, Michael, who I run my company with, both did that course. It was, at one point, it was just us in the course. So that was an experience. It tells you it was not a popular subject at the time. People didn't really know what it was. We did it and we both really enjoyed it. So that was kind of our first introduction to it a long time ago. Then Michael went on and did a PhD in it. So he stuck with it in academia and I went and did other things. I was planning to go into educational psychology, which I didn't do in the long run. I did various academic bits of research, which I enjoyed. So I liked that kind of academic research, the setting up of studies, trying to find things out, designing research questions, all of that kind of thing. So I had that behind me as well. Did a few different things down through the years. I was a primary teacher briefly, which was good. That's a life experience I would recommend for everybody. I think it's a very valuable experience. And then after I had my kids, I was working part-time. I was editing a magazine for the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors. So that sort of brought me back into that world again, because that's related. Human factors related to the UX world. Michael was obviously still working in academia. So we were both kind of in it in our own way. And eventually we came around to kind of thinking, actually, will we do this for realsies? I did it freelance for a while, did it with a few different companies and really, really enjoyed it. And then we thought, right, will we actually make this into something? Because what we found was there was a sort of an understanding of what user research, which is what we were focusing on at the time, what it was and a need for it in industry and in government as well. But there was a real lack, as we could see it, of people who could do research, actually do research. stuff that actually generated results and had something genuine behind it, rather than we've just looked at a few things or asked a few questions and come to our own conclusions. So we set up together in 2016. At that time we were called Fowlum. The reason for that name was Fowlum in Irish means to learn. So we were kind of working with companies to help them to learn. It was just like, we need a name, let's choose a name. We actually rebranded last year, started the rebrand process and finished it this year to become Nightingale Design Research. But yeah, so we went into that world because it interested us of old. Michael obviously had long experience of it as an academic, and we felt there was a market there. We thought we'd enjoy doing it. That was our motivation, really. And I suppose it turned out to be a good call, in the sense that we've now been going for 4 years. And, you know, we've had our ups and downs, as anyone has when running a company. But we're still here. So that's all we want for now, I think. We're still going strong. So hopefully that'll continue.
So how would you define what design research is? Because not a lot of people understand it in full.
Yeah, I think there's an understanding that there's a need to talk to customers. There's a need to understand customers. I see it a lot in the tech world. You know, you should really understand what customers need. You should really understand what customers want. I see research referred to sort of offhand. Do some research. And then when you're trying to figure out what does that research, or when someone is trying to figure out what does that research actually look like, there's often a very brief explanation of, you know, talk to customers, do an interview with a customer. And I think a lot of people then end up going into it thinking they can do it, and they really, really can't, because it's not necessarily recognized as a skill. I think that's the issue. I think it's the thing, you just go and ask some questions, get some answers. Bob's your uncle, you know what you're doing. I don't think people necessarily realize how difficult it is to decide the right question to ask. Firstly, to design your research study, even just to, you know, that concept that you design the research, you don't just go and ask some questions, you actually figure out in advance what you're trying to find out. Then you design, you know, understand what questions you're going to ask, whether you're doing it quantitatively through a study, to a survey, or qualitatively by talking directly to people, how you ask those questions. I mean, I see so many terrible surveys. I'm sure you've come across plenty yourself.
Oh yeah, I remember when I was working as a UX designer before I returned back into academia, sitting in this observation room behind two-way glass, and there was a design manager just right by me, and he was watching what the people were doing. It was quite a well-made study, I'll give him the credit, but it's just listening to the things that he already thought and backing up his own ideas.
That happens a lot. Yeah, that happens a lot. And I see, and people doing research on their own ideas and doing research on their own designs and believing that they can be objective, which, bless them, who can be objective? You know, I just think this is your baby. If you're running a company, if you're a startup, an entrepreneur, and you have a new idea, you're not going to be objective. You're going to want people to really like your product. And people are going to sense that from you. So they're going to not want to hurt your feelings unless they're a horrible person. So they're going to tell you exactly what they want to hear, you know, whereas I, as a researcher, I can go in and I'm a nobody. I have no investment in it. I have no prior kind of knowledge of what's going on. And actually, that's one of the big benefits I bring to a lot of work, actually, is that I'm an outsider. I'm somebody who you're not going to hurt my feelings. If you say it's terrible, I'm just going to go, yeah, I genuinely don't care that you said that. So I'm not going to justify myself. I'm not going to try and convince you otherwise. I'm just going to figure out why you think that is and get some proper insight as to why you think it's terrible, rather than just going, oh, you think it's terrible. Okay, that's my life's work down the bin. Yeah,
and I bet a load of junior designers don't dare tell the boss that the idea they've had is rubbish.
I think a lot of what I do as well, strangely enough, is ask the stupid questions. So in a group of people who are kind of invested in a product or who have a long history together, there's a lot of assumed knowledge. You know, everyone knows what we're doing. Everyone's on the same page. If I come in and say, well, what are you doing here? Like, what is the goal here? Often there'll kind of be an ominous silence at that point. And it's like, do we really know what we're doing? And it's sort of that thing of trying to clarify where everybody is and then nail down what you need to know and and just bringing that outside perspective, but an outside perspective that is not haphazard, I suppose. It's very focused. Because going back to what I was saying, the idea that anyone can do research, I've seen that situation where anyone can do research in inverted commas, where research has been done by people with the best intentions and they've really tried their absolute best, and it's just gathered a load of nonsense, just tons and tons of data that you can't do anything with. And I've actually helped people with that sort of research, and I've said to them, what were you trying to find out here? Like, what was the actual aim of the research? They had no aim. They didn't, and I just think, well, you just don't understand how research works in that case, because you don't understand that if you're doing some research, you have to know what you're trying to find out or you won't find it. And having reams and reams of data with no purpose is completely useless. You're just going to do nothing with it. And I think, we do come across situations where people say, oh, we've done research and it was pointless. And I just think, well, pointless research is pointless, and it's frustrating from our point of view because we have to counteract that. We worked with one big government organisation who everyone would recognise if I mentioned their name, but I won't. And they asked us to do some research, and they were a bit kind of disengaged because they were saying, oh, we've done research before and it was not that useful, but we have to do research for this project, so here you go, do it. And they gave me the research from the previous part of the project, and I looked at it and it was pure nonsense. Like, I can imagine it was full of fancy graphs and loads of data and whatever, but I guess, how could anyone use this? There's nothing useful here. It's data, it exists, but there is no connection made, and now you do this, or there's no recommendation, nothing. So I can see why they're frustrated and why they feel like this is not going to be useful. We went and did the research for them. And, they had ideas about what they wanted the research to do. And I just said, no, I'll do something different because that's not going to be useful. Let's do it this way. So we went and did it and came back and said, this is what we found out and this is what you need to do with it. And this is your next step. And then at that point, they were like, okay, now I get it. And now I get what research is, why research is useful. And actually, we've ended up doing a lot of different projects for that same organization because they kind of think, oh, we need some research, we'll go and ask.
So you proved to them you can do it.
Yeah, but and actually that it'll actually do something for them. It's not just ticking a box. It's actually we need some information here, so let's go and get it. And we know someone who can get it for us, and it'll actually be useful. We'll actually be able to make a decision based on it. We'll actually be able to do something with it. I think that's the key thing. I don't think that idea of decision making is necessarily well known that that's what it's for. It's not for loving your customer or having empathy or connecting in a way that's really happy, clappy and nice and positive and all that kind of thing. That's all good and lovely. But it's about making business decisions. It's about how do we make this business decision based on evidence that we can understand that actually tells us where to go next. And I've seen situations where decisions are being made kind of just out of the blue. Everyone sits around in a room. What should we do? Chat. The usual people dominate. Some people have more input than others. Some people have more sway than others. Eventually, a decision is arrived at. There's no real reason why that decision has been made. It's kind of, if you trace it back, it's usually just what one person wants. It has a pet project, wants that. Go ahead and do it. It fails. Oh, who's to blame? It's like, and then blame is apportioned to somebody.
So when you're doing design research, is it driven by business decisions, or what's the ultimate purpose of the research?
Well, that kind of takes us back to why we changed and rebranded, actually, because originally we were user research very specifically, and we do user research as part of what we do. But what we found was when we were actually going into companies, it ended up being a lot more than user research, because you have to know the whole landscape before you can make a decision. There's no point in knowing things about users if you don't know enough about the business, or you don't know enough about the market, or you don't know enough about the business model or any of those elements. So what we've ended up doing with a lot of companies is doing that research on the team. So we'll talk to the team and the senior management, the frontline team, try and understand what everyone is trying to achieve there and what the business goals are, because it's whatever you do has to align with the business, and it has to fit with where the business wants to be in however many years' time. So we need to understand that. We also might do some market research, just a general understanding what's out there, whose competitors are more deep into understanding of what the actual need in the market is, as identified by market forces. Obviously, the user research side of things, which is understanding the user, what they do currently in that situation, what their needs are, etc. And then what's the business model? And I think that's actually a very key part of it, especially in a startup circumstance. How are you going to generate money from this? And how is all of this going to fit together to result in a profit? Because a business without a profit is not a business. And I suppose that's what I, was saying about the decision-making side of things. It's how do you then make these decisions that fit all of these pieces together in a coherent fashion? So you're not making a decision that serves users, but then damages the business model, for example, or you're making a decision that serves the business, but doesn't serve any users, and therefore it doesn't serve the business by default. So it's trying to balance all of those together and give that kind of sense of oversight of everything. And really, it's a lot of what we do is, again, like I was saying, asking those stupid questions. When we first go into a company, the first question we usually ask is, what are you trying to achieve? And it's a very simple question, but very, very rarely do we get an answer that's kind of straightforward or that everybody knows. There's usually 5 or 6 different conflicting answers, or there isn't actually a clear answer. So what is it that you're trying to do here? What is it that you want? Where do you want to end up? And how do you know when you're successful? Like how do you know that you're on the right path? And what is the right path?
That must be so hard to find sometimes.
Yeah, and you at least have to start somewhere. It doesn't have to be definitive, of course, and it doesn't have to be we're definitely going to be here or there or anywhere. But there has to be an idea. Because if a team doesn't have a sense of a shared goal, then you're going to have 4 or 5 different people all striving for something different and not understanding how to make decisions that are coherent. So what we've had in the past is where the management team have had a discussion at one point in time where there was a certain bunch of circumstances. They've decided something. It was sort of in a crunch point, where things were sort of, we need to make a decision. So everyone was on the same page. Then things changed. And then I come in and kind of say, right, what are we doing? And everyone's got a different idea because as things have drifted onwards, circumstances have changed and everyone has thought we're going somewhere different. And now they're not on the same page anymore. And the difficulty of that is that if someone's trying to make a decision at any point for any reason, they're making a decision based on what they think is happening. Mm-hmm. So they're making a decision in good faith, thinking this is what we're trying to do, when everyone else is trying to do something different. And hence you get to a point where everyone suddenly comes back together and says, are we doing this? Where did this go wrong? Why are we doing this? And then that's the point that people realize, oh, we were all trying to do something slightly different, or more, or equally as common, I suppose, not more common, there isn't a goal. And that surprises me, I think, or it did surprise me. It doesn't surprise me anymore when there isn't a goal. So nobody knows what they're really trying to achieve. And decisions are made very haphazardly. So it's in the moment. It's what works now. This circumstance has arisen, so now we'll just do this, with no sense of actually, this is what we're trying to achieve. This is where we're going. So does this decision make sense given that circumstance? Does this decision make sense given this is what we're trying to do for users? Does this decision make sense given what we're doing with the business model? And it makes me wonder how people are not stressed, or they are, I suppose, they are stressed, because making a decision in the absence of evidence or in the absence of a clear goal, you're just making it sort of on instinct or guesswork or what you think is right. And the chances are it's going to be wrong. Maybe you're lucky and you make the right decision, but then the next one is likely to be wrong. You're never going to get all your decisions right, but if you at least have some solid foundation behind what you're doing, you're going to make mostly the right decisions.
Okay, so you walk into a company and you've done your research, you know why everything does or doesn't work, and what you're telling them is conflicting with what they think things are, the way you think it works. So how do you solve this conflict?
That shouldn't happen ideally, because we never go off and do the research just on our own. As far as we're concerned, the team, the company has to be on board, and they have to surrender a certain amount of control to us, and they have to accept that we might not come back with what they want to hear. So we wouldn't necessarily come back with research that was out of the blue, or, that was sort of so different from what they were expecting that it's a real shock to them. Because day one, we would do that groundwork stuff. Going into them, speak to usually the way we would do it, it depends obviously on the company and the situation and everything. We'd speak to the management team first, and then we would speak to the frontline staff. And the management team and the frontline staff very rarely have the same view of things. And we try and get a common view on everything, try to bring together all of those bits of what are we trying to achieve, what is the state of our company right now, what's our capacity, where do we want to go, business model, aims for the product, all of that kind of thing. So we have all of that background. And then that's what then pushes that piece of research forward. So what do we need to know now? Where are the gaps? Where are the bits that you're just not sure about? What are the things that are holding you back? So we go and do the research. Now, sometimes we'll do that research and come back and it will be, not necessarily what they expected, but all going well, we've set the groundwork for them to at least accept it. We'll set the expectation that this could be not what you were hoping for. However, that is also a good thing, because we'll never let a company hang, basically, in the sense we'd never say, right, well, it was all wrong and you just did the wrong thing and nothing's going to work. We would be very subtle with it in terms of saying, these are the things you expected to see. This is what we actually saw. Therefore, this is what you need to do to potentially move towards something that's more effective, more successful, more likely to succeed in the market. Or these are suggested recommendations for what you can do, or this is the thing, these are the problems we've seen, or the positives we've seen, the negatives we've seen. So it's not necessarily what you want to hear, but hearing it early on is better. Hearing it now is better than hearing it 3 years time, 10 years time, when you have a company that's about to collapse, or you have a situation that you can't rectify. Rectifying it early on is easier than rectifying it later down the line. And I think companies we work with realize that. I think we do prepare them for this may not be pretty in terms of what you find out. And that, there's a range in that, sometimes it's just small things and sometimes it's big things. I think if a company has done its research from day one, this is the thing I suppose I try to get across to companies. Doesn't always get the message, doesn't always get across. If you've done your research from day one, before you ever made a product, before you ever decided to start any business, or before you ever decided to go down any particular route, the chances that you'd be really surprised later on are so much smaller. Whereas if you started off day one and was like, I have a great idea, I'm just going to go ahead with it, and then push, and only at a later stage you go, hang on a minute, I need to figure this out. There is a danger that at that point you'll find out, this isn't really going to work, is it? Or this isn't working, and it's never going to work because there's some fundamental problem with it. And the wall I've been banging my head against for the last couple of years is never going to move, because I've got the wrong idea, I've got the wrong concept.
So getting everyone to be on the same page and work together is obviously really important to the whole product success. So how do you get everyone to work together when you've got all this hierarchy that can kind of stop people speaking out?
It's tough. And I think, interestingly enough, actually, it depends on the situation, but I've been in the situation a few different times where I've talked directly to the kind of most senior person, often the founder, or the CEO, or whoever it is who's the senior decision-making person. And I would normally kind of start the conversation with them, because obviously they're the ones who are making the decision to do this process. It might be someone higher up the design team as well, if it's a much bigger company where, you know, I wouldn't necessarily be talking to the top of the company. And what often happens, or when we talk through the situation in advance, what I try to get across is this is a situation in which your decision-making process will be made easier. So the fact that you're trying to make decisions, you're supposed to just pull things out of thin air and have great ideas all the time and know where you're going. It's not fair. You're a human being. There's only so much you can do. For a lot of founders, or especially founders, I think entrepreneurs, startups, that's a relief. They're like, oh, okay, so I don't have to like be the person going, ta-da, this is the great idea. And my answer is no. There's other people in your team, and they're equally as valuable, you know, in terms of their knowledge and their insight. But also, if you're trying to make a decision and you can't, then chances are you just don't have enough information. That's not a reflection on you as a person. That just means you haven't got the right evidence to be able to make a decision. Once you have evidence, you can say, okay, well, this is the situation. Based on this situation, what's the right approach? And chances are you'll get the right answer. You won't always. Sometimes it is a matter of taking a punt because there isn't a clear answer. But for most situations, once you have the evidence, you can move forward. So I think that then changes the mindset of the decision maker in the room, because their attitude is not that, okay, it's about everybody kind of getting their voice heard and shouting over each other and me looking like the great superstar. It's okay for everyone to just state their position. And again, it's trying to get that kind of feeling in the room as well, which is, it's not always easy, although it does happen quite simply in the end, I think, when people get the message, because people are often in meetings where they have a reputation to protect, or they feel like they have to know their stuff. They'll start grandstanding and try to say how great they are and how much they know. And to a certain extent, I'll kind of let them do that because they need to. And then they'll wear themselves out, and eventually they'll start going, and actually, I don't really understand how this works, and I don't really know how we're supposed to do why. And that's the place it needs to go, where everyone is saying, okay, this, I suppose the idea isn't to grandstand and who's better than who and winning points. It's put all the stuff out on the table, no matter what it is, no matter if you're not very happy with it and you're a little bit not ashamed, but, you know, a little bit protective of the fact that you don't know this stuff. Just put it out there. It's fine. Because once it's all out there, you can gather it all up and know where to go next with it. And people find it quite a therapeutic process, I think. They find it quite, I don't know, it's a release, it's a vent situation where they can say, okay, yeah, I've you know, when you start a job and there's a thing you need to do and you never find it out and you always are like stuck forevermore, because you get a year into the job and you're like, I can't ask this because it's going to make me look like an idiot. That happens in teams all the time, where there's people they just don't get something, or they've lost a piece of the detail, or they don't quite understand what's going on. And I kind of try to make it really clear that that's okay. You know, it's okay not to know. And some of it is asking the right questions as well. I think that's the researcher bit, you know, that's what question that would you ask here that would actually get you the right answer? Not the defensive answer, not the grandstanding answer, not the markety answer, but the real answer. And some of that is just digging through, you know, why is that? How has that happened? Why do you think that's the situation? Keeping at it so that people can put all of that, their cards on the table. And like I say, it is a relief, I think, for people as well, because I come in as that impartial outside person. So I can ask the stupid questions. I can be the person who doesn't know anything. And people explain things to me, and in the course of explaining it to me, realize they don't agree. So someone will explain something to me, and then someone else go, no, that's not how it works. And then they have a discussion about, oh, right, okay, well, way do you think it works? And then, oh, yes, okay, all right. And the focus is me, not them, so they're trying to instruct me and tell me how to do it. And so there isn't necessarily any antagonism between them about the fact that there isn't a clear agreement. So it's kind of it's maybe something of a subtle skill, I suppose, but it's one I've kind of honed over the years.
Now, it's really interesting what you're saying, because whenever you pick up a book or anything about how to do research, they always focus on these raw skills, like how you know to interview, how you analyze data, maybe how you do some stats, but they never spend much time on how you find that right question, how you work with people, how you get that deeper understanding. And do you think that's why people get design research wrong?
I think so. I think asking the right question is really tough. It becomes a skill you develop. I think nowadays I can think of a question off the top of my head. I don't always get it right. Sometimes I ask a question and think, I shouldn't have asked that. That sort of led them down the wrong path. But I can always pull it back. I think asking a question that doesn't lead someone in a certain direction is really hard. And I think people really, really struggle. It's like the yes, no game show thing, where you can't say yes or no. If you tell someone you can't say yes or no, all they want to do is say yes or no. It's really hard to think on your feet, to think, what is the question here that will get me the core of what that person is saying? And it's listening as well. I mean, that's kind of an obvious one, but not everyone's a very good listener. So it's trying to hear the signals. It's trying to hear what a person isn't saying and why they're leaving something out, or what they allude to that sounds like an interesting thing. And that's thinking on your feet as well. I kind of take it for granted to a certain extent. And it's only when I'm showing it to somebody else, or we're watching a video of research and people go, oh, why did you ask that question? And I think, isn't it obvious? And that then you kind of realize, okay, this is something you have to learn. But I don't think it's a talent of any sort. I think it's a skill. I think anyone can do it. But I think the idea that it's a skill isn't there. So I think people think, oh, anyone can do it. And then they try to do it. And then they think, God, this is hard. And when they come out the other end with an interview that says nothing, or a survey that says nothing, and then they jump to thinking, oh, research is pointless. They don't think, I just wasn't very good at this, it surprises me, I think, because, I'm not a designer. If I designed something, it would look like I'm not a designer. That doesn't make me think design isn't any good. It means I don't have the skills. I could learn them if I wanted to, but I just don't have the skills. It's not drawing. It's not, I know what colors are. It doesn't mean I'm a designer. So I think research is similar. You can know how to ask questions. You can ask questions of people all the time, but knowing how to ask research questions is a completely different thing. So,
oh yeah, I totally agree. That's a skill that you learn, because I remember just after finishing PhD, I was putting this survey together that went out to something like 32,000 people. And I thought, yeah, I've got this. I'm full of confidence. I knew what I was doing. So went out there and we had 10 replies. It was a total disaster. And you kind of realize that, right, I don't have this skill. I've got a lot to learn, even though I've just done a PhD with this stuff. So it's always this learning skill that you can always get better at.
Oh, totally. And it's understanding that a skill exists as well. I think that's the bit that frustrates me, because I think there is a sense that anyone can write a survey, for example. That's just a list of questions, so you don't need any particular skill for that. And writing a survey is especially hard. I enjoy writing surveys because I'm quite nerdy. For me, it's like doing a crossword puzzle. It's that kind of mental exercise I quite enjoy. But it's hard. And it's sort of second nature to me now, but I had to demonstrate to my colleague how to do it. And it was only when I was doing it and I was going back and forth and she was suggesting questions and I was explaining why they would work that I was thinking, gosh, this is hard, isn't it? But again, it's one of those things that once you get a bit of a skill with it, you sort of do it automatically. It's like driving a car. And then when you have to explain it to somebody else, you're like, how does this actually work again? How do I do this? And you then kind of realize how difficult it is. And I suppose you have a bit more sympathy for people who struggle, but it's the same thing. I suppose it frustrates me when people are like, oh, we'll just write our survey ourselves. And then they get really bad data back. And then they make decisions based on that really bad data. And then they wonder why those decisions were bad decisions. And that's the bit that, that's where it all goes wrong. And then they kind of think, oh, that research was useless. And it wasn't.
Is there anything you can do with bad research? Like, can you salvage it, or is it just something you chuck in the bin?
Unfortunately, no. It's kind of like a one-shot effort, I think. It's, again, salvaging bad research, I suppose, is a skill as well, in the sense that you then have to analyze the research. That's another skill, in the sense you have to design the research, you have to put the research out and get a response if it's a survey, and then you have to analyze it. So then you have to understand what you can actually extrapolate from those answers. And so many times I've seen overreaching of a major degree, where people are drawing conclusions from things that are just, how did you draw that conclusion? That's not what that data is saying at all. So potentially a bad survey, you could draw some conclusions from it, but usually bad surveys is so bad that actually the responses are telling you literally nothing. I mean, I'm thinking of the survey that the Duchess put out, Kate. She put out a survey about outcomes in childhood or something. I can't remember the exact survey. She put it out just before coronavirus. I think it was the start of the year, February. It's like 5 or 6 different questions. And I know it was possibly a marketing gimmick, but I was just looking at the questions thinking, what are you going to get from this? You can't draw any conclusions, such convoluted questions. And I was just thinking, how are you going to actually say anything from this, other than you're going to then kind of disingenuously extrapolate something from this. You're going to say something that the data doesn't say. And I think people really struggle to think about people answering a survey where all they have is the words on the page. They don't have context. They don't know what you were really trying to ask. So they will only interpret as is. They won't interpret it generously. They will interpret it as you've written it on the page. And if there's any potential for them to misunderstand, they will. Some people will, at least. So then you're potentially collecting accurate data from some people who understand the question and inaccurate data from everybody else who didn't really get what the question was asking. So then how do you distinguish between the two of them? You don't, basically. So if there's any potential for a question to be misinterpreted, you just have to ditch all of that data, because you don't know who was getting it and who wasn't.
So I won't ask you about the actual tools you use in your research, because that must be so specific to the project working on the company. So when you're approaching a design research problem, do you tend to use qualitative or quantitative methods?
We do both, actually. We do alumni surveys quite regularly, and that's obviously quantitative because we have thousands of responses to those. So it's all data, data points, although we do include a qual question in there normally for our own punishment. But we do a lot of the kind of more design research stuff is very qualitative, so it's mostly qualitative. It's interviews, focus groups, observations, and we do things and just kind of traditional usability and user testing stuff as well. So that's complete a task and observe someone or get them to talk through what they're doing, cognitive walkthrough type thing. So I enjoy qualitative. I like quantitative. I like writing surveys, and I quite like doing the statistics at the other end. But the qualitative stuff I find really useful, because you get the real essence of things, and you have to really look into what does this person mean. I think interpreting the qualitative stuff is quite difficult, in the sense that it's trying to pull out the meaning of what somebody is saying rather than just focusing on a person said X. I mean, that's not useful. But what is the thing they're referring to? What is the problem? What's the core issue here? And this other person said Y, but actually they're both talking about the same thing. So they're both talking about how difficult it is to find time to do this thing, or they're saying different things, but the meaning is the same. And it's that extraction of meaning that I find really interesting, and trying to really get at actually what is the thing what is the layers of things that they're talking about. So if they say, oh, this thing is really time consuming, Well, what does that mean for them? It means that they miss out on a work thing, for example. What's the consequence of that? Oh, it means that they don't feel like they're never going to get a promotion. So it's consequential for them. It's difficult. But what is the problem really? Why don't they have time? What's the time? What's causing the time issue? And it's getting at those problems and trying to work with, I suppose, with companies who are developing products to really understand that it's that problem you're trying to get at. You could design a thing for them and it looks shiny and it does loads of things and it's very functional, etc. But it just doesn't solve their problem because you don't understand what their problem is.
So when you're trying to understand people's, I guess, emotional reactions, and you got all this data, do you use any software to help you understand it, or is it all pen and paper?
Yeah, so we do transcriptions via software because we actually use, we've recently started using a program called Tetra Insights. It's quite a new program which manages qualitative videos of interviews and does transcriptions, automatic transcriptions, which are not perfect because transcriptions rarely are, but you then have to tidy them up. And everything else then is manual because you have to engage with the text. You know, you have to really see what a person means by something, and only a human can do that reliably at the moment. But we will look at things as well. And I know there's things out there to measure, you know, people's reactions and things on their face. But I think I don't quite understand those because I think you can see how a person's reacting visually yourself. And it is quite important. So especially when we're doing observations with software, we will often video a person using it and we will look at, are they furrowing their brow? Are they huffing? Are they tutting? Are they kind of making annoyed noises? Or do they go, oh, you know, make a nice little kind of, oh, I wasn't expecting that. Or, oh, that's nice. Or, you know, those kind of reactions that are not filtered. And it's amazing, actually, the effect of seeing someone's face can have on a design team. So they kind of say, yeah, it's fine. It works fine. We're fine. We're happy with the product. There's no issues. And we might explain in words, you know, there are issues with the product. You know, these things don't really work. And they won't necessarily believe us because they think we're just complaining or we're being nitpicky. And then they see a user and the user is making these awful faces and is frowning and tutting and sighing and banging their table and all of this kind of thing. And that has an immediate effect. It's like a shame effect almost, where the team are say, oh, that's bad, isn't it? And it just convinces them straight off the bat. I mean, you only need 10 seconds of it. And
a good design team.
Yeah.
A bad design team will look at that and go, oh my God, they're doing it wrong. What's wrong with that user?
Yeah, what's wrong with you? Although I haven't really come across that, to be fair. I think I do come across, independently of that situation, I do come across, users, they just need to be taught what to do, or they need to be told to do it differently or whatever. They need more education, which is frustrating because I think it's so hard to use, then they need a massive tutorial. Then do you not see the problem with that? But I do find that when developers, especially, actually, strangely enough, I think developers so rarely get to see their product in the real world, that if they see a person using it and they see, oh, that's what you were trying to do. Oh, okay. That's what the person, I would have done that differently then. I would have built it differently. They can see how it's actually functioning out there in the real world. It makes so much more sense. It really surprises me, or again, I suppose it doesn't surprise me anymore. Now, it used to surprise me when there was a situation where there was a company building a product and there was such a divide between the people who were actually making decisions about the product or building the product and how it really worked in the real world. There was like such a chasm. It always made me think, if you were a designer or a developer and you were trying to make these decisions, and some of those decisions are kind of day by day decisions, you know, the small decisions, what do we do here, move that over there, and you really had no reference point, you had no, I've seen a user use this, or I've seen how a person does this in the real world, and you had nothing to go on from that. You were just doing it sort of in a vacuum. How do you do that? You know, how do you make those decisions with any level of certainty? Is it just a case of guessing and hoping for the best and then finding those issues later on and then fixing them or getting blamed for them? And I think that's, again, what frustrates me a little bit, because we have to sort of explain to companies to a certain extent of the need for that research to come before the design process, so that it then pushes the design process and informs it, so that designers are not making decisions in a vacuum. Because those decisions will be better decisions just by default. They know what they're referring to. They have a reference point, they have recommendations, and they have an idea of where it's all going to go in the end.
It's that classic design thinking where define the right problem and everything follows. Design the wrong problem and what you end up with is beautiful rubbish.
Exactly. And I think conceptually, again, people do struggle with defining the problem. I think it's a real headbender because it's almost philosophical or abstract in the sense that people often have to pull people back from solutionizing. So they will try to go, oh, it'll be an app. Oh, it'll look like this. Oh, it'll have screens. Oh, it'll have a login. Oh, it'll have this. And they start thinking concrete really, really fast. And once you go concrete, the concrete solidifies and you're stuck there forever. You might as well forget it because you're way beyond where you can be. Whereas I have to really pull people back and think, assume technology doesn't exist, or assume you have technology of all sorts. It's 2040 and it can be AI and machine learning and holograms. So forget about all the things that are possible. Anything is possible. Forget about what it's going to look like. And just think about the people and their problem. What is the problem? What is the thing they're trying to do? What is the task they're trying to achieve? In their lives now as they are, don't think about the tech they use or whatever. It's just they are people trying to do a thing. What's that process? And it's really surprising how really, really hard it is to keep people in that space and to not let them run ahead and think, oh, but it could be a web app and it could be blah, blah, blah. And it's come back. Because what I always say is, another thing I say is, how do people solve this problem now? Because unless it's an unknown problem that people don't even know they have, which I can't even think what that might be, they somehow solve it. They somehow solve the problem already. It could be a terrible solution that doesn't work. It could be extremely expensive or time consuming or onerous or whatever, but they solve it somehow. Unless it's just something they don't do, in which case, why are you even engaging with that? I mean, that's something that, that comes up as well. This is not something people do. So unless you're trying to introduce them to something completely new, which is, of course, what Facebook did with social media, okay, it happens. But equally, Facebook was solving a problem, so to speak, by allowing people to communicate. It was taking something people did in the real world and transferring it online in a way that suited their needs. So it's still solving a problem to an extent.
Yeah, I can totally see great value in this near future of some kind of technology which solves emotional problems but doesn't involve smartphones. Because every time you talk to people and say, why can't we do this or what can we do that? They always come back to, we're going to have the smartphone app and we'll do these things. It's incredible. And there really must be more to it than this kind of limited technology. So do you think that people's current experiences are limiting what they imagine we could be doing and achieving?
I think there's two parts to that. I think if you ask people what they want, you're onto a loser straight away, because people want a bigger house and longer life and better health, and you're not going to give them to it. Asking people what they want is just a dead end, because it's essentially asking them to come up with a solution, and therefore that's, it's the job of the designer or the company to come up with a solution by understanding what that person's problem is, and they don't necessarily understand what the problem is, then that's not their job. But also, I think there is a lot of problems out there are complicated. People are complicated. And so there's this sense, I think, you can solve a complicated problem simply. Long-standing social problems are kind of seen as build an app for it. apps will solve the world. And sometimes I've had to come to grips with companies and say, what makes you think you can solve a problem that's been around since the time of Jesus? You know, this is a really difficult social problem that you now think you can solve because how, why, what. So sometimes I think it's a case of people thinking too complicated and too big, because sometimes it's a matter of just making people's lives simpler. And I do agree from that point of view, in the sense of trying to think smaller in a way, in the sense that people are resourceful and they get through their lives despite a lot of problems. So to a certain extent, I think tech or other products are there just to kind of smooth their way. And if you're trying to step in and solve a big problem for them and try to kind of tell them what they need and you know, we're going to all sing and all dance, you could potentially either not give them something they need, but you could also give them something they really don't need, like all the problems about with social media. It's kind of transferring problems that exist in the real world to a platform without really thinking about the consequences. It's I don't think social media has created problems. I think it's just transferred them to a different world, and they just come out in a different way. And I think sometimes it's about how can we actually support people in doing what they do best, really resourceful, being really imaginative, being able to tackle things. And tech needs to be there to be that kind of helper along the way, which is why I'm not the biggest fan of things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, because I think a lot of it is about circumventing human nonsense. You know, humans are messy, so we're just going to automate it.
It's all about bias and understanding people, understand the connection, understand what's unique. So I remember there was a research paper, I must have done about a year or two ago, and it was looking at why people in different countries love fashion and why they go shopping. And we found out that Chinese fashion lovers have very different motivations and ideas and what they want out of their designs than UK fashion lovers. So if it's companies that are trying to break into China, trying to break into Asia, and they're just thinking they can take their current apps and just put different language on, and it doesn't work. And time and again, we've seen the companies fail. I think only Zara has actually made a way into the market because they've understood the people and the different approaches.
Yeah, and it's, again, what are you actually trying to do? I mean, I know that the primary aim of a for-profit company is to make profit, but that, even as a goal, can get sort of mixed up in other things, which surprises me, actually. You know, sometimes I have to talk to companies about how are you actually going to generate money here? And how you generate money is giving people things they really need because they're going to pay for them. That does a job for me that I need doing. Therefore, I'm going to pay for that. The chair I sit on, the laptop I use, you know, they all solve problems for me, so I'm going to pay for them. If your product doesn't solve an identifiable problem for somebody, firstly, you're going to really struggle to explain why they need it in the first place, you know, because you don't know why they need it. You're not solving a problem for them, but also, why are they going to pay for it? And I do think it's interesting. I think that's one of the places that Facebook really came unstuck, is that it started out as a kind of a product without a cause, so to speak. It was for fun, and it ended up being an advertising platform, but then it has to provide value of some sort, so people will come and look at the adverts. And it sort of became a victim of its own success because it had to generate revenue somehow, and then it didn't have a business model that generated revenue to begin with. So it got taken over by advertising, and that completely damaged it, because the two aims of it, I suppose, advertising and social interaction, don't necessarily mix very well. So then you get all of this complicated nonsense around who controls the platform, and it becomes a publisher, and it becomes responsible for its content, etc. All of these things that potentially, have had research been done day one, they could have been pointed out. What are you going to do when content becomes unacceptable? How are you going to generate money from this? You know, where is this going to end up? Where do you want this to go? Because I'm sure the aim wasn't for it to end up where it is, which is successful, but also with a terrible, terrible reputation.
Oh, absolutely.
You're
So
completely right.
I remember
So there's
seeing a video of Mark Zuckerberg when he's at college, so American uni,
in America,
and he's in the headquarters of Facebook. It's like one tiny room, it's like a college frat house or something. And there's a keg in the corner. He's talking about this will be used for keg stands when we're having parties and all that kind of stuff.
Facebook is
but he's saying that the reason they can do what they're doing on Facebook is because they're a small website focusing on college
trying
students.
to be a big thing.
They just couldn't do all these other things that they're doing if they were focusing on everyone trying to be general. So it really is.
Sorry, it's been a long day.
So it's been really fantastic talking to you tonight.
I know the feeling.
I always like to end on this one question, which is, what do you think would make the world a better place?
Accepting humans for how they really are. I think it's, humans are complicated and messy and they've got their own needs and they're quite predictable in a lot of ways. There's just things that people need and that they don't change regardless of technology. I think there's an attempt to kind of translate everything into the technological world in a way that doesn't necessarily make sense for humans. We are humans who use technology. We're not technology ourselves, and therefore who we are in our physical world needs to be reflected in our technological world in a real way. And I think we're on the way to that, but I don't think we're anywhere near it yet. I think over time that will become more the case, where it's less about extracting things from people and trying to make them fit into a world, and more about actually how can we make this work for us and support us and take all the talents and skills and resourcefulness that we have as human beings and just make, enhance it, improve it, rather than replacing us, rather than saying automate the world, out of existence. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's a fad. And I think eventually it'll come to be realized that the most powerful machines already exist, us. And so if you enhance us and support us, then that's where the real value comes, rather than working against us and finding us difficult. Just understand other humans. They're not that scary. Find a researcher who can do it for you if you don't know how to do it yourself.
And that is really excellent. So, Francess Brown, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
So thank you once again, Francess Brown, Chief Executive Officer at the Nightingale Design Research. It's been a pleasure sitting down, talking to you and hearing about your ideas of what design research is, the kind of things that we need to really understand as designers, and how to make our practice better. I think we can all walk away from this with a better appreciation that if you give the design research its full due diligence, if you give it thought, give it the attention it deserves, this will bloom into a better, more successful, more emotion-based product. So that's something we can all learn from and benefit from. So if today you've been inspired by Francess Brown's words and may want to reach out to Nightingale Design Research, or maybe just to Francess, I'm going to put a link to the company and to the Facebook group in the show notes of the podcast. And I really hope that you have a great journey forward together. So if you found today's episode useful, please subscribe to us on Spotify, Google Podcast, or Apple Podcasts, or even better, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and let us know what you enjoy about the show. I've been Dr. Chris Parker. Good night.